Jake Miller wiped sweat from his forehead as he crawled out of the air vent. The ship's cooling system had been acting up again, and someone had to fix it. That someone was always Jake. He was good at fixing things, even if he was not good at much else. The diplomatic ship Starbound was humanity's pride and joy. It carried Earth's best and brightest to meet alien races across the galaxy. Jake was not one of the best and brightest. He was just the guy who kept the lights on and the air flowing. "Jake, hurry up!" called Ambassador Lisa Carter from down the hallway. "The Zephyrians will be here soon." Jake grabbed his tools and ran toward the main meeting room. The Zephyrians were coming to sign a peace treaty with Earth. This was the most important day in human history, and Jake was worried about broken air conditioners. He had heard stories about the Zephyrians. They were tall, strong, and loved to fight. Their skin was gray, like stone, and their eyes glowed red in the dark. Most humans were scared of them, but Jake was too busy thinking about technical problems to be scared of anything. The meeting room was full of important people in fancy uniforms. Jake felt out of place in his dirty work clothes. He tried to sneak to the back wall where the environmental controls were located. "Welcome, honored Zephyrians," said Ambassador Carter as the aliens entered the room. Jake had never seen a Zephyrian before. They were even bigger than he had imagined. The leader was almost 8 feet tall with muscles like a bodybuilder. Scars covered his arms and face. His name was HFY the Unyielding, according to the briefing Jake had skipped to fix. "A broken toilet. Humans," growled HFY in a deep voice that shook the walls. "We come to make peace. But first, we must follow the old ways." Ambassador Carter smiled nervously. "Of course. We respect your traditions." "Good," said HFY. "Before we sign any treaty, there must be a duel. Your champion against our champion. This is the law of our people." The smile disappeared from the ambassador's face. "A duel? We were not told about this requirement." "All important agreements must be proven in combat," explained HFY. "It shows that both sides are serious. Who is your champion?" "Ambassador." Carter looked around the room. Her eyes found Captain Roy Jenkins, the ship's security chief. He was a big man who knew how to fight, but he looked pale compared to the massive Zephyrian. "Our champion is—" she started to say. "Actually, there's a problem," interrupted Dr. Pete Davis, the ship's doctor. He whispered something in the ambassador's ear. Jake could not hear what the doctor said, but he saw the ambassador's face turn white. She looked around the room desperately. All the military officers suddenly found reasons to look at their feet. Meanwhile, Jake was having his own problems. The environmental controls were acting up again. The room was getting too hot, and the air was becoming thick and hard to breathe. He needed to ask someone about shutting down the main heating system, but everyone was focused on the Zephyrians. Jake raised his hand to get attention. "Excuse me, about the heating system." The room went quiet. Everyone stared at him. The translation device that helped humans and Zephyrians understand each other made a strange beeping sound. HFY's red eyes focused on Jake. "You challenge? Me, small human? What?" Jake looked confused. "I just wanted to ask about—" "He accepts the challenge," announced another Zephyrian. "The small one will fight HFY the Unyielding." "No, wait," said Jake. "I think there's been a mistake. I'm just the maintenance guy." But the Zephyrians were already getting excited. They started chanting in their own language. The translation device was smoking and making weird noises. Jake's question about the heating system had somehow been turned into a challenge to fight their strongest warrior. "Jake," whispered Ambassador Carter urgently, "just go along with it. We'll figure something out." "Go along with it?" Jake's voice cracked. "He's huge. He'll kill me." "The champion has been chosen," declared HFY. "We go to the arena now." Before Jake could protest anymore, the Zephyrians surrounded him and started walking him toward the door. He looked back at the ambassador with panic in his eyes, but she just gave him a weak thumbs up. The arena was in the ship's cargo bay. The Zephyrians had somehow built it in just a few hours. It was a circular platform surrounded by energy barriers. Seats had been set up around it, and Jake could see that word had spread. Half the ship's crew was there to watch him get beaten. "Up! This is being broadcast across the Zephyrian Empire," said Amy Collins, Jake's girlfriend, as she grabbed his arm. "Millions of people are watching. That's supposed to make me feel better? Asked Jake. Amy was a xenobiologist who studied alien life forms. She was smart and pretty, and Jake had no idea why she was dating him. Right now, she looked as scared as he felt. Just try not to die, she whispered. Kethvar was already in the arena, doing warm-up exercises that involved lifting weights that weighed more than Jake's entire body. The Zephyrian warrior had taken off his shirt, showing more scars and muscles. He looked like he could punch through a steel wall. Jake looked down at himself. He was average height, skinny, and his biggest physical accomplishment was once carrying 2 toolboxes at the same time. This was going to be a very short fight. "Warriors!" called out an elderly Zephyrian who seemed to be the referee. "The challenge has been made and accepted. Fight with honor." Jake stepped into the arena on shaky legs. The energy barrier activated behind him, trapping him inside with 8 feet of pure destruction. Kethvar grinned, showing teeth that looked like they could bite through metal. "I will make this quick, small human," said Kethvar. "You show courage by facing me." "Thanks," squeaked Jake. "That's very nice of you." The bell rang, and Kethvar charged forward like a freight train. Jake did the only thing he could think of. He ran. Jake was not a fighter, but he was good at running away from his problems. He sprinted around the arena with Kethvar chasing him. The crowd was laughing, but Jake did not care. Running was keeping him alive. "Stand still and fight," roared Kethvar. "I'm good with running," Jake yelled back. As he ran, Jake noticed something. The arena floor had strange patterns carved into it. They looked almost like maintenance access panels. Jake had spent so many years crawling around the ship that he could spot a hidden panel anywhere. Kethvar got tired of chasing and decided to corner Jake near the wall. The massive warrior raised his fists, ready to end the fight with one punch. Jake backed away in terror, tripped over his own feet, and fell backward. As he hit the ground, his hand slammed down on one of the carved patterns. There was a clicking sound. Kethvar stepped forward to grab Jake, but the floor opened up beneath the warrior's feet. It was a trap door built into the ancient arena design. Kethvar fell into the pit with a surprised roar. The arena went completely silent. Jake sat on the floor, breathing heavily and staring at the hole where his opponent had disappeared. At the bottom of the pit, Kethvar was sitting in a pool of thick mud, looking confused but not hurt. "By the ancient laws," announced the referee in a shocked voice, "the human has won. Kethvar the Unyielding has fallen, and the victory goes to..." He paused. "What is your name, champion?" "Jake Miller," said Jake weakly. "The victory goes to Jake Miller," shouted the referee. The Zephyrian crowd erupted in cheers. They were chanting something in their language that the broken translator could not understand. But from their excited faces, Jake guessed it was something good. Ambassador Carter ran into the arena, her face showing relief and disbelief. "Jake? You did it! You actually won!" "I fell down," said Jake. "He fell down more. You are now Alpha Prime," said the referee solemnly. "Supreme Champion of the Zephyrian Empire. This honor has not been given to an outsider in 1,000 years. Jake blinked. "I'm sorry. I'm what now?" But the celebration was already starting. Zephyrians were lifting Jake onto their shoulders, chanting his name and calling him their new leader. Somewhere in the crowd, Amy was laughing and crying at the same time. Jake Miller, maintenance engineer, had just accidentally become the most powerful military leader in this part of the galaxy. And he had done it by tripping over his own feet. This was going to be a very long day. 3 weeks had passed since Jake Miller became Alpha Prime by accident. He was sitting in what used to be a storage room but was now called his command center. The walls were covered with star maps, military reports, and pictures of alien ships that he did not understand. "This is a disaster," said Admiral Karen Ross, pacing back and forth. She had flown in from Earth as soon as news of Jake's victory reached home. "You're a maintenance worker, not a military commander." Jake was trying to read a report about something called fleet movements. The words were big, and the ideas were bigger. "I know that," he said. "I keep telling everyone that, but nobody listens." The door opened, and Ambassador Carter walked in with a tall Zephyrian wearing fancy military clothes. This was General Marcus Hayes, who had been assigned to teach Jake about being a leader. The general looked like he would rather be anywhere else Alpha Prime. said General Hayes in his deep voice. "We need to discuss the campaign against the Nexus pirates." Jake looked up from his report. "The what now?" Admiral Ross rubbed her forehead. "The pirates, Jake. They've been attacking trade ships for months. As Alpha Prime, you're expected to lead the fleet against them." "But I don't know how to lead a fleet," Jake protested. "I know how to fix air conditioners and unclog toilets. Those are very different skills." General Hayes sat down heavily. "This is what I have been trying to explain to the High Council. The human may have won the duel, but he knows nothing of warfare." "Hey," said Jake, "I won that duel fair and square." "Well, accidentally and square." Amy Collins entered the room carrying a stack of books. She had been spending all her time in the Zephyrian library, trying to understand their culture. "I've been reading about your traditions," she told General Hayes. "Did you know that Alpha Prime is supposed to be more than just a fighter? The old texts say he should be a leader who thinks differently." "The old texts say many things," grumbled General Hayes, "but they do not say how to win battles with someone who asks, 'What's a tactical formation?' every 5 minutes. Jake had been asking a lot of questions. Military life was complicated, and nobody seemed willing to explain things in simple terms. Yesterday he had asked what flanking maneuver meant, and 3 officers had looked at him like he had grown, a second head. "Look," said Admiral Ross, "we need to find a way to make this work. Earth's reputation is on the line. If Jake fails as Alpha Prime, the Zephyrians might decide humans are weak. That could mean war." "No pressure," muttered Jake. The next few days were filled with lessons that made Jake's head hurt. General Hayes tried to teach him about battle, strategies, ship formations, and something called logistics that seemed to involve a lot of math. Jake was better with his hands than with books, but he tried his best. The lessons were held in the ship's briefing room, which had been set up with a big table showing a model of local space. Little ships moved around the table to show different battle plans. "The key to defeating pirates," explained General Hayes, "is to cut off their supply lines. Pirates are like parasites. They need host ships to survive." Jake picked up one of the model ships. It was surprisingly detailed. "These pirate ships, what kind of engines do they use?" "Engines?" General Hayes looked confused. "Why does that matter?" "Well, different engines need different fuel, right? And different maintenance schedules. If we know what kind of ships they're using, we can figure out where they get supplies." General Hayes stared at Jake for a long moment. "That's actually not a terrible idea." It was the first time the general had said anything positive about Jake's suggestions. Meanwhile, Jake was having other problems. The Zephyrian crew members kept treating him like some kind of war god. They would stop talking when he walked by and bow their heads respectfully. It made Jake uncomfortable. "They're scared of me," he complained to Amy one evening. They were in his quarters, which were much bigger than his old room, but felt cold and empty. "They respect you," Amy corrected. "In their culture, strength in battle is the most important thing. You beat their champion. I tripped him into a hole. You found a weakness he didn't see and used it to win. That's exactly what a good leader should do." Jake was quiet for a moment. "What if I mess this up? What if people get hurt because I don't know what I'm doing?" Amy took his hand. "Then we'll figure it out together. You're not alone in this." The next morning, Jake got his first real test. An urgent message came in from a Zephyrian patrol ship. They had found wreckage from a merchant vessel that had been attacked by pirates. The attack had happened just 6 hours ago. "This is our chance," said General Hayes excitedly. "The pirates cannot be far away. We can catch them if we move fast." "Admiral," Ross looked skeptical. "Jake isn't ready for a real battle." "I'm standing right here," said Jake. "And you're right. I'm not ready." "But people are in danger, aren't they?" General Hayes nodded. "The merchant ship was carrying medical supplies to a colony world. If the pirates took those supplies, people will die," finished Jake. He took a deep breath. "Okay, let's go catch some pirates." The Zephyrian fleet was impressive. Jake stood on the bridge of the flagship, a massive ship called the Thunderstrike, and watched smaller ships move into formation around them. There were 12 ships in total, each one bristling with weapons. "Alpha Prime," said Captain Zorlin, the ship's commander. "We are approaching the attack site. What are your orders?" Jake looked at the main screen, which showed the wreckage floating in space. Pieces of metal drifted slowly, and there was no sign of survivors. It made him angry, in a way he had not expected. "Can we track which way the pirates went?" he asked. "Their ships are fast and leave little trail," replied Captain Zorlin. "By now they could be anywhere." Jake thought about his conversation with General Hayes. "What about their engines? Pirates need fuel, right? And they need to get rid of waste heat?" Dr. Helen Parker, the fleet's science officer, looked up from her instruments. She was a human who had volunteered to serve on the Zephyrian ship. "Actually, that's brilliant. Every engine leaves a specific heat signature in space. If we scan for the right pattern—" "Do it," ordered Jake. For the next hour, Dr. Parker worked with the Zephyrian sensor operators to analyze the space around the wreckage. Jake watched nervously, hoping his idea would work. "Got something," announced Dr. Parker. "3 ships, probably light cruisers, heading toward the outer rim. The heat trail is fading, but we can follow it." "All ships, follow that trail," commanded Jake. He was surprised by how confident his voice sounded. The chase lasted for 4 hours. Jake spent most of that time asking questions about how the ships worked and what the different buttons on the bridge did. The Zephyrian crew seemed amused by their Alpha Prime's curiosity. "Contact," reported the sensor operator. 3 ships, holding position near an asteroid field." "That's them," said General Hayes grimly. "Pirates often hide in asteroid fields to avoid detection." Jake studied the tactical display. The pirate ships were smaller than the Zephyrian vessels, but looked fast and dangerous. "Can we surround them?" "Standard tactic," agreed Captain Zorlin. "We spread out and close in from all sides." But as the Zephyrian ships moved into position, the pirates detected them and started to run. Their ships were indeed faster, and they began to pull away. "We're losing them," reported the helmsman. Jake felt frustrated. His first real command was about to end in failure. Then he noticed something on the tactical display. "Wait, those asteroids, are they real?" Dr. Parker checked her readings. "Some of them are giving off unusual energy signatures, almost like they're hiding something," finished Jake. "The pirates aren't running away. They're leading us into a trap." He was right. As the Zephyrian ships chased the pirates deeper into the asteroid field, hidden weapons platforms began powering up. The pirates had turned the whole asteroid field into a fortress. "All ships, emergency stop," ordered Jake. "Don't follow them any further." The Zephyrian fleet halted just as the first weapons platform opened fire. Energy beams lit up space where they would have been if they had continued the pursuit. "How did you know?" asked Captain Zorlin, clearly impressed. Jake shrugged. "When you spend your life fixing things, you learn to spot when something isn't working the way it should. Those asteroids were too perfectly placed. General Hayes was..." grinning. "Perhaps there is hope for you yet, Alpha Prime." But the battle was far from over. The pirates were still hiding in their fortress, and the Zephyrian fleet was stuck outside, unable to get close without being destroyed by the hidden weapons. Jake stared at the tactical display, his mind racing. Somewhere in that asteroid field were medical supplies that sick people needed. He had to find a way to get them back. "General," he said slowly, "tell me about these weapons platforms. How do they get power?" Jake Miller stared at the asteroid field where the pirates were hiding. The hidden weapons platforms made it impossible for the Zephyrian fleet to get close. Every time they tried to approach, deadly energy beams forced them back. The weapons. "Platforms are powered by fusion reactors," explained General Hayes. "Each one can operate independently for months. But they still need fuel," said Jake thoughtfully. "And they need to get rid of heat." Dr. Helen Parker was studying her sensor readings. "The platforms are definitely generating a lot of waste. Heat. They're trying to hide it by venting into space, but heat has to go somewhere," finished Jake. "It's basic physics." Captain Zorlin looked confused. "How does this help us? We still cannot approach without being destroyed." Jake was quiet for a moment, thinking about all the maintenance problems he had solved over the years. "What if we don't approach at all? What if we make them come to us?" "Pirates do not leave safe positions to attack superior forces," said General Hayes. "It goes against their nature." "Maybe not," said Jake. "But what if their safe position suddenly wasn't so safe anymore?" He turned to Dr. Parker. "Can you map the heat signatures from all the platforms?" "Already working on it," she replied. "I count at least 20 platforms scattered throughout the asteroid field." Jake studied the heat map on the main screen. The platforms were arranged in a defensive pattern, but there was something else. The heat patterns showed a flow, like hot air moving through a building's ventilation system. "Look at this," Jake pointed to the display. "The heat isn't random, it's following a pattern, like they're all connected to a central system." General Hayes leaned forward. "A central power distribution network?" "Exactly." Jake was getting excited now. "They're not 20 separate platforms, they're 20 parts of one big system, and every system has a control point." Dr. Parker enhanced the sensor display. "You're right. There's a much larger heat source in the center of the field. It's hidden inside what looks like a large asteroid." "That's their command center," said Jake confidently. "Take out the command center, and the whole network goes down." "But how do we reach it?" asked Captain Zorlin. "The platforms will destroy any ship that tries to fly through the field." Jake grinned. "We don't fly through it. We walk." 2 hours later, Jake was floating in space wearing a maintenance suit he had modified himself. The suit was designed for repair work outside ships, not for combat missions, but it was small enough to avoid detection by the pirate sensors. "Alpha Prime, are you certain about this plan?" came General Hayes' voice through the radio. "Not even a little bit," replied Jake honestly. "But it's the only chance we have." The plan was risky and complicated. Jake would use his maintenance suit to fly between the asteroids, avoiding the weapons platforms by staying in their sensor blind spots. Meanwhile, the Zephyrian fleet would create distractions to keep the pirates busy. Jake pushed off from the Thunderstrike and began his journey through the asteroid field. The maintenance suit's small thrusters were quiet and produced very little heat signature. To the pirate sensors, he would look like just another piece of space debris. Flying through an asteroid field was terrifying. Rocks the size of buildings drifted past him, and one mistake would mean getting crushed or lost in space forever. But Jake had spent years crawling through tight spaces inside ships. This was just a bigger, more dangerous version of the same thing. "First platform coming up," he whispered into his radio. "I can see it attached to that big asteroid on the left." The weapons platform looked like a metal spider clinging to the rock. Its sensors swept back and forth, searching for threats. Jake waited until the sensor beam passed, then quickly moved to the next hiding spot. It took him an hour to work his way through the outer defenses. By the time he reached the central asteroid, his suit's power was running low and his hands were shaking from stress. "I can see the command center," he reported. "It's built right into the asteroid. There's an airlock on the side, but it's heavily guarded." "Can you find another way in?" asked Dr. Parker. Jake studied the asteroid carefully. Like any good maintenance worker, he was looking for service access points. "There," he said finally. "Waste heat exhaust port. It's too small for a person normally, but..." He pulled out his tools and began working on the suit's life support system. If he removed some of the backup equipment, he could make himself thin enough to squeeze through the exhaust port. "Alpha Prime, that is extremely dangerous," warned General Hayes. "Without backup life support, you will have only minutes of air." "Then, I better work fast," said Jake. Getting into the command center through the exhaust port was like crawling through a hot, narrow tunnel filled with poisonous gas. Jake's suit filtered most of the toxins, but he could feel the heat building up inside his helmet. Finally, he emerged into a large room filled with computers and control panels. 3 pirates were sitting at monitoring stations, watching displays that showed the positions of the Zephyrian fleet. Jake recognized the pirate leader immediately. Captain Rex Morgan was a large human with scars on his face and expensive-looking cybernetic implants. He had been a military officer once, according to the intelligence reports, before turning to piracy. "Status report," Morgan was saying to his crew. "Are the Zephyrians still holding position?" "Yes, Captain," replied one of the pirates, a blue-skinned alien with 4 arms. "They seem afraid to enter the field." "Good. Let them wait out there while we finish stripping the medical supplies. Those drugs will bring a fortune on the black market." Jake felt anger boiling up inside him. People were dying while these pirates sold their medicine for profit. He looked around the room, trying to figure out what to do next. The control center was more complicated than anything Jake had ever worked on, but the basic principles were the same as ship maintenance. Power flowed from generators to distribution, points to end users. Cut the right connections, and the whole system would shut down. Jake quietly moved to the main power distribution panel. It was protected by an electronic lock, but Jake had been bypassing electronic locks since he was an apprentice. A few minutes with his tools, and the panel was open. Inside was a maze of power cables and circuit boards. Jake studied the layout, tracing the connections with his eyes. If he disconnected the main power coupling and reversed the polarity on the backup systems... "Intruder alert!" shouted one of the pirates. Jake had been spotted. Captain Morgan spun around, drawing a weapon. That looked like it could cut through steel. "Well, well," said Morgan with a nasty smile. "A little human spy? Did the Zephyrians send you to sabotage us?" Jake was too scared to lie. "Actually, I'm their Alpha Prime," Morgan laughed. You're just a kid in a maintenance suit." "I get that a lot," said Jake, and yanked out the main power coupling. The lights went out immediately. Emergency power kicked in a second later, but it was too late. Jake had already reversed the polarity on 3 backup systems, and the command center's computers were shutting down in confusion. "Stop him!" shouted Morgan, but in the darkness and chaos the pirates could not see what Jake was doing. Jake worked frantically, his maintenance training taking over. He rerouted power cables, overloaded safety systems, and generally broke everything he could reach. Within minutes, the entire weapons network was dead. "Thunderstrike, this is Alpha Prime," he called on his radio. "The platforms are down. Move in now." Through the command center's windows, Jake could see the Zephyrian fleet advancing into the asteroid field. Without their weapons platforms, the pirates were helpless. But Jake's problems were just beginning. Captain Morgan had found him in the darkness and was pointing his weapon directly at Jake's helmet. "Clever little engineer," snarled Morgan. "But not clever enough. You just destroyed my defense network, which means you've outlived your usefulness." Jake raised his hands in surrender. "Wait, before you shoot me, can I ask you something?" "What?" "How did you get past Zephyrian security to set up this base? Their patrols should have found you months ago." Morgan smirked. "Someone on the inside has been feeding us patrol schedules and shipping routes. We always know exactly where the Zephyrian ships will be." "Someone on the inside?" Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with his failing life support. "You mean a traitor?" "More than one, actually. Some very important people want this war to continue. Pirates are good for their business." Before Jake could ask more questions, the command center shook as Zephyrian ships began their attack. Morgan stumbled, and Jake used the distraction to dive behind a computer console. "You can't hide forever, Alpha Prime," shouted Morgan, firing energy blasts that melted holes in the metal walls. But Jake was not hiding. He was working. While Morgan searched for him, Jake had found the command center's communication system. With a few quick modifications, he turned it into a recording device. "Tell me more about these traitors," Jake called out, trying to keep Morgan talking while his modified system recorded everything. "Why should I tell you anything?" Morgan replied, but his ego was bigger than his caution. "Fine. You want to know? Chancellor Zorketh has been our best customer. Half the Zephyrian High Command is involved. They sell us information. We attack. Ships. They use the attacks to justify bigger military budgets. Everyone wins. Except the people who get killed. That's business, kid. Nothing personal." Jake finished his recording just as Zephyrian Marines broke into the command center. Captain Morgan surrendered without a fight, probably figuring he could buy his way out of trouble with his government connections. But he had not counted on Jake's recording. An hour later, Jake was back on the Thunderstrike, exhausted but victorious. They had rescued the medical supplies and captured the pirate base. More importantly, Jake now had evidence of corruption in the highest levels of Zephyrian government. "You did well, Alpha Prime," said General Hayes with something that might have been respect. "Your tactics were unconventional but effective." "I just fixed what was broken," said Jake tiredly. "Same thing I always do." Amy hugged him tightly. "Don't ever scare me like that again." "I'll try not to," Jake promised. But as he looked at the recording device in his hands, Jake knew his problems were just beginning. The pirates had been the easy part. Now he had to deal with traitors, corrupt politicians, and enemies who wore friendly faces. Being Alpha Prime was getting more complicated every day. Jake Miller had never been to a fancy dinner party before, but as Alpha Prime, he was expected to attend many of them. The Zephyrian High Council was throwing a celebration feast in his honor, and Jake felt very uncomfortable in his new formal uniform. Remember, whispered Amy as they walked into the grand hall. Smile, nod, and try not to trip over anything. Important. That's asking a lot, replied Jake nervously. The hall was filled with the most powerful people in the Zephyrian Empire. Military officers, government officials, and wealthy merchants all wanted to meet the famous Alpha Prime who had defeated the Nexus pirates. Jake shook hands and tried to remember names, but there were too many people, and they all looked serious. Alpha. Prime Miller, said a smooth voice behind him. Jake turned to see Chancellor Zorketh approaching with a friendly smile. The Chancellor was smaller than most Zephyrians, but he carried himself like someone used to being in charge. Chancellor, said Jake politely. According to his recording from the pirate base, this man was a traitor who had been helping pirates attack innocent ships. But Jake could not prove it yet, so he had to pretend everything was normal. Your victory against the pirates was most impressive, continued Zorketh. Perhaps we could discuss future military operations. I have some ideas. That might interest you. I'd like that, lied Jake. Maybe we could meet privately later? Excellent. I will arrange something. As the Chancellor walked away, Jake felt a chill. The man was planning something, and Jake was probably walking into a trap. The dinner was, long and boring. People made speeches about Jake's courage and leadership while he sat at the head table trying not to spill food on his uniform. Finally, the formal part ended, and people began talking in smaller groups. Jake was looking for a quiet corner when someone grabbed his arm. It was War Priest Cool Maven, one of the most traditional members of the High Council. His face was painted, with ritual scars, and his eyes burned with fanatic intensity. Alpha Prime, said Colmaven in a harsh whisper, we must speak privately. About what? About the corruption that poisons our empire. You have evidence, yes? The recording from the pirate base. Jake was surprised. How did you know about that? I have my sources. Chancellor Zorketh and his allies think they are clever, but some of us have suspected their betrayal for months. We need that recording to expose them. Jake studied the War Priest carefully. Why should I trust you? Because I am the only one who can keep you alive long enough to use that evidence. Zorketh knows you have the recording. He will try to kill you before you can reveal it. Before Jake could respond, the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, but in the confusion, someone had grabbed Amy and was dragging her toward a side exit. Amy! Jake shouted, pushing through the panicking crowd. He reached the exit just in time to see Amy being forced into a vehicle by three figures in dark clothes. The vehicle sped away before Jake could stop it. She has been taken to ensure your cooperation, said Chancellor Zorketh, appearing beside Jake with a group of armed guards. Give me the recording, and she will not be harmed. You son of a... Jake started to say something very rude, but War Priest Coolmaven cut him off. Chancellor, you make a mistake. Alpha Prime is under the protection of the warrior caste. If you harm him or his mate, you will answer to our sacred laws. Your sacred laws are old and weak, Coolmaven. This empire needs practical leadership, not ancient traditions. More guards appeared, and Jake realized he was in the middle of what looked like a military coup. Zorketh's people had weapons drawn, while Coolmaven's supporters were reaching for their own guns. Jake, said a familiar voice. Lieutenant Commander Steve Adams, his best friend from the maintenance crew, stepped out of the shadows with several other humans. We're here to get you out of this. Steve? How did you get here so fast? We've been watching the situation. Earth Command sent us when they realized how dangerous things were getting. Jake was relieved to see friendly faces, but he noticed something odd. One of the humans with Steve was Patricia Williams, who claimed to be a diplomatic aide. But Jake had seen her before, during his maintenance rounds on various ships, and she had always been in places where diplomatic aides were not supposed to be. We have a ship waiting, said Steve urgently. We can extract you and Amy and get you back to Earth safely. Amy's been kidnapped, Jake said. I'm not leaving without her. The girl is safe for now, said Chancellor Zorketh, but that will change if you do not give me what I want. Jake looked around the room. Armed groups were facing each other, ready to start a war. Amy was in danger. His best friend was offering him an escape, and somewhere in this mess were the medical supplies. That sick people needed. I want to make a deal, said Jake loudly. Everyone stopped and looked at him. Chancellor, you want the recording. War Priest, you want to expose the corruption. Steve, you want to get me out of here safely. I want Amy back. Maybe we can all get what we want. What do you propose? Asked Zorketh suspiciously. Jake took a deep breath. A trial by combat, me against your champion. If I win, Amy goes free and the recording gets played for everyone to hear. If I lose, you get the recording and I'll go back to Earth. That is acceptable, said Colmaven immediately. Wait, protested Steve. Jake, you can't fight a trained warrior. You got lucky once, but... I got lucky once, agreed Jake. Maybe I'll get lucky again. This is foolish, said Patricia Williams. We should extract Alpha Prime immediately. But Jake was already walking toward the arena that had been set up in another part of the building. He had an idea, but it would require perfect timing and a lot of luck. The second arena was smaller than the first one, and it was packed with spectators. Word had spread quickly about the challenge, and everyone wanted to see if the Alpha Prime could repeat his miracle. Chancellor Zorketh's champion was a professional fighter named Rathkar the Destroyer. He was even bigger than Kethvar had been, and his body was covered with cybernetic enhancements that made him faster and stronger than any natural warrior. This will not take long, said Rathkar as he entered the arena. The human got lucky once. Luck does not happen twice. Jake looked up at the spectator gallery and saw Amy sitting with Zorketh's guards. She looked scared but unharmed. Next, to her, he spotted Dr. Helen Parker and General Hayes, who had apparently been invited to watch their Alpha Prime get beaten up. The fight began differently than the first one. Instead of charging forward, Rathkar moved carefully, studying Jake's movements and looking for weaknesses. Jake tried his running strategy again, but the cybernetically enhanced warrior was much faster and cut off his escape routes. After 5 minutes of dodging and weaving, Jake was getting tired. Rathkar was barely breathing hard. You cannot run. Forever, little human, taunted the champion. Jake was backed against the arena wall with nowhere to go. Rathkar raised his massive fists, ready to end the fight, but Jake had been studying the arena's construction while he ran around it. You're right, said Jake. I can't run forever, but I don't need to. He pulled out a small device from his pocket and pressed a button. The arena's gravity generator, which Jake had reprogrammed during the opening ceremonies, suddenly reversed its polarity. Instead of pulling everything down toward the floor, it began pushing everything up toward the ceiling. Rathkar, who weighed twice as much as Jake, shot upward like a rocket and slammed into the arena's energy barrier with a loud crash. The cybernetic warrior hung there, pinned against the ceiling and unable to move. Jake, who was lighter and had been expecting the gravity change, managed to grab onto a support beam and avoid being thrown upward. Technical victory to Alpha Prime, announced the referee, who was also hanging from the ceiling and trying not to sound ridiculous. Jake quickly restored normal gravity, and Rathkar crashed to the floor, unconscious but not seriously hurt. The crowd went wild. Chancellor Zorketh looked like he had swallowed something very sour. The recording, demanded War Priest Colmaven. Play it now, as agreed. Jake activated the playback device, and Captain Rex Morgan's recorded voice filled the arena. The pirate. Captain's words about corruption in the High Council caused an uproar among the spectators. Chancellor Zorketh has been our best customer, came Morgan's voice. Half the Zephyrian High Command is involved. They sell us information. We attack ships. They use the attacks to justify bigger military budgets. The Chancellor tried to deny everything, but the evidence was clear. Within an hour, he and his supporters were under arrest. Amy ran down to the arena and hugged Jake tightly. How did you know the gravity thing would work? I didn't, admitted Jake. But I spent the opening ceremony studying the arena's systems. I figured if I was going to have to fight in it, I should know how everything worked. General Hayes approached them, shaking his head in amazement. Once again, Alpha Prime, your methods are completely unorthodox. But effective, just fixing what's broken, said Jake tiredly. But as he looked around at the celebrating crowd, Jake realized that exposing Zorketh's corruption had only solved part of the problem. There were still pirates out there, still people in danger, and still plenty of things that needed fixing. And somewhere in the crowd, Patricia Williams was watching him with calculating eyes, making notes on a small device. Jake had a feeling that his troubles with Earth's intelligence services were just beginning. Being Alpha Prime was getting more dangerous every day. 6 months after becoming Alpha Prime by accident, Jake Miller stood on the bridge of the massive, flagship Starkeeper, watching the strangest fleet in galactic history prepare for battle. Zephyrian warships flew alongside human cruisers, Alteran science vessels, and even a few ships from races that most people had never heard of. "Status report," Jake called out, his voice much more confident than it had been in his early days as a leader. "All ships report ready, Alpha Prime," replied Captain Zorlin. "The Alliance fleet consists of 47 vessels from 12 different species." Jake nodded, studying the tactical display. The enemy they faced today was unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. 3 weeks ago, the Void Collective had returned from wherever they had been hiding. For the past 500 years, their first attack had been devastating. 3 core worlds of the Zephyrian Empire had been destroyed in a matter of hours, their populations either killed or simply vanishing without a trace. The Collective's technology was so advanced that conventional weapons barely scratched their ships. "Amy, any luck with the analysis?" Jake asked. Dr. Amy Collins, now the fleet's chief xenobiologist, looked up from her research station. "The Void Collective ships are definitely using technology we don't understand. Their hulls seem to exist partially outside normal space-time. But they still need power," said Dr. Helen Parker from her position at the science console. "Energy has to come from somewhere, even if they're using physics we can't explain." Jake had spent months learning to think like a military commander, but he was still an engineer at heart. Every system had weaknesses, even alien ones that seemed impossible to understand. "General Hayes, what's our intelligence on their fleet composition?" General Marcus Hayes, who had become one of Jake's most trusted advisors, consulted his reports. 17 ships, ranging from small fighters to massive dreadnoughts. They're holding position in the ruins of the old Zephyrian homeworld. The ruins of Zephyr Prime were a sacred place to the Zephyrian people. Their ancestors had built the first cities there over 2,000 years ago, before expanding to other worlds. The fact that the Void Collective was using it as a base was both insulting and strategically brilliant. "They're waiting for us," observed Commander Steve Adams, who now served as Jake's liaison with Earth forces. "They know we'll come to drive them out of the Holy System." "It's a trap," agreed War Priest Kulmaven, who had become the new Chancellor after Zorketh's arrest. "But we cannot leave them in control of our ancestral home." Jake understood the political situation. If he refused to attack, the Alliance would fall apart. Different species had joined the fleet for different reasons, but they all expected him to lead them to victory. The problem was that conventional tactics would not work against an enemy this advanced. "Patricia, what does Earth Command think about our chances?" Jake asked. Agent Patricia Williams, whose real job as an intelligence officer was no longer a secret, checked her secured communication device. "Honestly, they think we're all going to die, but they also think this is the only chance we have to stop the Collective before they spread to other sectors." Jake was quiet for a moment, thinking about everything he had learned over the past 6 months. He had studied military history, alien cultures, and advanced physics, but most importantly, he had learned to trust his instincts. "I have an idea," he said finally, "but it's crazy, and it will require everyone to work together perfectly." "Your crazy ideas have worked before," said Amy with a smile. "This one is different. We're not just going to attack the Collective. We're going to make them attack themselves." Jake explained his plan to the assembled fleet commanders. It was complicated and risky, requiring precise timing and perfect coordination between dozens of ships from different species. The key was something Jake had noticed in the sensor readings from the Collective's previous attacks. Their ships seemed to exist in normal space and something else at the same time. But that meant they had to have anchor points connecting them to regular reality. "If we can overload their anchor points," Jake explained, "their ships should be forced back into normal space where we can fight them." "But how do we overload something we do not understand?" asked Captain Veltar of the Alteran Science Fleet. "We use what they're using against them," replied Jake. "Dr. Parker has been analyzing the energy signatures from their attacks. She thinks she can create a resonance wave that will interfere with their dimensional anchors." It took 4 hours to set up the attack. Ships from 12 different species had to coordinate their movements and timing perfectly. Jake felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders as he gave the final orders. "All ships, move to attack." Positions. Remember, we get one shot at this. If it doesn't work, we won't get a second chance. The Alliance fleet approached the ruins of Zephyr Prime in a complex formation that looked chaotic but was actually carefully planned. The Void Collective ships detected them immediately and began powering up their weapons. Energy spikes from the enemy fleet, reported the sensor operator. They're preparing to fire. Hold position, ordered Jake. Wait for it. The Collective opened fire first. Beams of dark energy that seemed to bend space itself lanced out toward the Alliance ships. Jake watched the tactical display as the enemy fire approached. Now, he shouted. All ships, execute resonance burst. 47 ships from 12 different species fired simultaneously, their combined energy focused on a single point in space. Dr. Parker's calculations had been perfect. The resonance waves struck the Void Collective ships just as they were firing their own weapons. The effect was spectacular and terrifying. The collective ships, which had been flickering in and out of normal space, suddenly became solid and visible. But they were also caught in their own energy beams, which were now bouncing back at them from the resonance field. "It's working!" shouted Amy. "Their dimensional anchors are overloading!" The largest collective ship, a massive dreadnought that had been completely invisible moments before, materialized directly in the path of its own weapons. The dark energy beam struck its hull and began tearing it apart from the inside. "All ships, attack now while they're vulnerable," ordered Jake. The Alliance fleet opened fire with everything they had. Zephyrian plasma cannons, human missile batteries, Alteran particle beams, and weapons from half a dozen other species all struck the suddenly solid collective ships. But the victory was not complete yet. The collective ships were adapting, trying to re-establish their dimensional anchors and return to their protected state. "They're recovering faster than expected," warned Dr. Parker. "The resonance field is weakening." Jake made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. "All ships, ramming speed. Target the command ship." "Alpha Prime, that's suicide," protested General Hayes. "Maybe, but it's also the only way to make sure they don't escape and attack other worlds." Jake took direct control of the Starkeeper and aimed it at the largest collective vessel. Around him, other ships followed his lead, their captains trusting their Alpha Prime even when his orders seemed insane. The collision was massive. The Starkeeper's reinforced hull smashed into the collective command ship just as its dimensional anchor was trying to reactivate. The feedback from the dimensional disruption destroyed both vessels, but it also created a chain reaction that spread to the other collective ships. One by one, the enemy vessels were pulled back into whatever dimension they had come from, their anchor points permanently severed. The threat to the galaxy was over. Jake found himself floating in an escape pod with Amy, watching the wreckage of 2 fleets drift through space. Most of the Alliance ships had survived, but the Starkeeper was gone. "We did it," said Amy softly. "We did it," agreed Jake. "All of us together." The rescue ships arrived an hour later. As Jake was pulled aboard a Zephyrian cruiser, he was met by War Priest Kulmavin, who was smiling broadly. "Alpha Prime," said the new Chancellor. "The High Council has voted unanimously. We offer you permanent leadership of the Zephyrian Empire, with full authority over all military and civilian matters." Jake looked around at the mixed crew of humans, Zephyrians, and other species who had fought together in the battle. "I'm honored by the offer, but I have a counter-proposal. Yes? Instead of an empire ruled by one person, what if we created an alliance where everyone has a voice? We proved today that different species working together are stronger than any one group alone." The discussion that followed lasted for weeks, but eventually the Galactic Defense Alliance was born, with representatives from dozens of species working together to protect their worlds from future threats. Jake Miller, the maintenance engineer who had become Alpha Prime by accident, was elected as the Alliance's first director. It was not a job he had ever wanted, but it was one he had learned to do well. 3 years later, Jake stood in his office aboard the Alliance headquarters station, wearing a uniform that was part military, part diplomatic, and part maintenance worker. He was reviewing reports from across the galaxy when Amy entered with their 6-month-old daughter, Sarah. "How are things in the outer sectors?" Amy asked. "Quiet, mostly. A few pirate groups here and there, some trade disputes, the usual. Problems. Nothing we can't handle." Jake took his daughter in his arms and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there were billions of people from hundreds of different species, all living in peace because a nervous engineer had once tripped over his own feet in an arena. "You know," he said to Amy, "I never did fix that air conditioning system on the Starbound." Amy laughed. "I think you've been fixing bigger things since then." Jake Miller, former maintenance worker, accidental champion, and reluctant leader, smiled as he looked at his daughter. She would grow up in a galaxy where different species worked together, where problems were solved through coup.